Reserve planning is so often misunderstood by association members. It's not because the math is complicated, it's because people are. Every board decision involves more than numbers because emotions, perceptions, and competing priorities are real. Owners want to keep assessments low, while boards need to collect enough cash to run the association. In this Psychology of Reserves webinar, we're joined by prominent Colorado attorney David Graff and our Association Reserves Colorado regional partner Brian Farley to explore the human side of reserve planning and how the human factor so strongly influences outcomes.
Thank you, Paige. Brian, everybody, welcome. Thanks for being here. This is an interesting class. I've been to about 4,000 HOA meetings now over the last 25 years, wrote a book about it. And one of the concerns that I routinely see is this difficulty in messaging and getting acceptance of the need to increase reserves. And so we're going to talk about some of the lessons that Brian and I have learned. We'll talk about how this class originated, and it was a class that we were teaching, I think it was last summer. It's kind of a funny story, but it fits in with one of our examples, so I'll save that for later. Brian, did you want to say anything in the beginning here?
No, I think you've got it from here, David.
Awesome, thanks. So, of course, a disclaimer, educational use only, not legal advice. We are not psychiatrists, psychologists, sociologists, just students of HOA meetings. So please, before you rush out and do something, talk to your legal counsel, talk to your manager, talk to your reserve study professional. In framing this issue right now, depending on where in the country you're located, you probably are seeing a turbulent period, right? Which is reasonably common. It's going to depend on the building cycles of your locality, right? Here in Colorado, we've had pretty marked boom and bust building cycles over the last 40, 50 years. And it's important to remember that if your community or your locality as a manager, if your properties, your portfolio are facing a lot of underfunded, deferred maintenance, it's a phase in the life cycle of any community. It's not forever, right? Community starts out new, developer in some cases, not in every case, keeps the assessments reasonably low because it helps home sales. Then we have years of peace, and with peace often comes apathy. And obviously real property and improvements on property decline with every passing moment and with every rainstorm. And then all of a sudden those gradual changes, like children growing up that you don't notice, all of a sudden there's a problem. And then we have this awareness. We have to fix something. We have to make over our community. We have to replace the roofs. We have to do X, Y, and Z. And then we have this turbulent period where we're scrambling to educate homeowners about the need for additional money, explaining to the homeowners to the best of the current board's ability why previous boards may not have increased assessments for decades at a time. The money is raised one way or the other, depending on the urgency of the situation. And then we have relative peace again. So right now, for a number of our clients here, and from what I understand nationally, we're in this turbulent period where, a significant number of infrastructure components are 30, 40, 50 years old, and they weren't made to last forever. And I was at a reserve assessment increase meeting, and I was talking to someone from Egypt, and he was adamant that buildings should last 800 years because that's what happens in Egypt. Look at the pyramids. I said, well, that's not usually my experience with American-made dwelling units, and certainly not with most buildings that were built within the last 40 or 50 years. So it was an interesting conversation for sure. And so there's two overarching principles that I think are helpful to understand when we're trying to talk about changing the status quo. And if the status quo has been not, and I don't want to use the word aggressively, but not repeatedly raising assessments to keep pace with the repeated increases in the cost of living, then there's two hurdles that we often face. And one is classic sales. And I'm not saying we use this to sell, but it's used in sales all the time, which is anchoring, right? This car is worth $60,000, but if you drive it off the lot today, I'll give it to you for $39,900. And when you say the $60,000 value, you anchor the price in at what it's worth to illustrate the discount. Now, unfortunately, we kind of have the reverse situation in associations where we're saying, I know your assessments have been $150 a month for the last 20 years, but now they have to go to $450 a month. And that's a really difficult mental leap for people to make because their mental picture or their bias of what assessments should be set at is anchored in an unrealistic number. And this anchoring is just a mental shortcut, which is why I think $150 is good, and therefore I'm going to resist it going to $450. And I'm using exaggerated examples to make the point. And that's a hard thing to overcome, but it can be done with re-anchoring, right? And sometimes we would, and I don't want to speak for Brian, but the re-anchoring would be, that's fine. If you don't want to raise your assessments to $450 a month, then there's a trade-off, which is we may have to do one or more special assessments. And that word is understandably scary, very stark and attention-getting. And we got to be careful, I think, in how we message that because we don't want to create paranoia where people start lighting up the social media world, which they probably will anyway, with, visions of us being on the Titanic and sinking to the bottom of the ocean, going down with it, but as a way of re-anchoring the reality of what the assessments need to be. And for me, it's much better reference points. And I rely heavily on people like Brian to come into these meetings with his rented bulletproof vest to explain, listen, I know I don't have to pay the assessments. I know I don't live here. But as an outside professional, I can tell you that these numbers, your $150 a month assessment might have worked in 1977, but Gerald Ford is no longer your president. And I can't remember who was the president in 77 off the top of my head. So we need to create new numbers based on really good data. That's anchoring in a nutshell. And then there's path dependence, which is kind of similar, but it's not quite the same because it's almost like a community's cultural identity, right? It's this structural inertia to change. We've always done it this way. We've always been underfunded. We've always kept assessments low. And it's really like changing identities. And it's not quite as easy as doing it just with new numbers to anchor reality too. It's more about a whole transition as we try to educate the homeowners of how we believe they should look at their community. And it's not just, doing everything on a shoestring at a last minute with the lowest bidder, because that often produces significant downstream consequences. But talking about, listen, we need to revitalize this community. We need to assure the residents that the roofs are not leaking. And this is kind of a sometimes multi-year campaign of saying, and we don't say it this way, but like, there's a new sheriff in town. We need to get a handle on this situation, and we all need to change the way we look at the value of the association, the importance of it, and the role that it plays in our lives so that we can get past this structural inertia or identity of, no, we always do things on shoestring budgets. And so these are the specific problems we're going to talk about today after going through the big picture, not having a reserve study, having a homemade reserve study, having a reserve study or a belief that it's hard to interpret and too expensive is the situation that Brian and I faced live where a homeowner yelled out, it's too expensive. Boards wanting to do understandably Band-Aids, this concept of losing to inflation. Perceived gift to owners is one of the more important ones that we'll talk about, which is this subtle shift of messaging, which is we're not saving for the future. We are saving for the future, but it's not for the benefit of future people. It's you're paying as you go. And then we'll talk about the impact of under-reserved communities for resale ability.
At Association Reserves, we make the present less stressful and the future more secure. If you'd like to join us in that mission, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below with what you'd like to see in a future webinar. Let's plan for your best future.